Good afternoon, everyone. How are you? Welcome to FPCI Public Discussion. With me, Calvin Ko, your master ceremony for today's discussion. And also, I am the Associate Research at FPCI. And today's discussion will be very interesting, where we're going to discuss the relation of ASEAN and China, a relationship that has been through many challenges, including today's COVID-19 crisis. And next year, we are entering the 30 years of relationship between ASEAN and China. Today's, with all the speakers, we're going to pose questions and how we see the relationship that has been 29 years and how we envision the relationship ahead. So today's discussion will be moderated with our senior FPCI advisor for ASEAN-China survey, Dr. Sofwan Albana, and also the head of International Relations undergraduate program at University of Indonesia. So before we continue our discussion, we would like to welcome the opening remarks from our founder of Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia, Dr. Dino Jalal. Pak Dino, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Calvin, and thank you for everyone who's watching this very important discussions today. I want to welcome our panelists. First, our moderator, Pak Sofwan, who's very respected international affairs lecturer at the University of Indonesia. We have also Pak Jayan Menon from Singapore. We have Dr. Ken P from Cambodia, and Antoine, who is my longtime friend from Vietnam, and we had a very interesting time traveling to North Korea several years ago on a Southeast Asian scholarly visit. I just have a very short point to make, and that point is the fact that I think if you look at what happens in Southeast Asia in the last 30 years, one of the most important, if not the most important, geopolitical and geoeconomic development is China's engagement in the region. It wasn't felt that much before in the previous decades before that, but after 1991 and onward, China really had a systemic and sustained and focused and energetic effort to engage Southeast Asia and ASEAN, both bilaterally and also ASEAN as an organization. And if you look at the amount of diplomatic and economic resources and also political resources allocated by China to build relations with Southeast Asia, you will see that this is a very important part of China's foreign policy. And China is fast emerging as a global player, but I think we can say safely that China regards the Southeast Asian region as a very strategic region for many reasons, of course, but this is the region where China wants to have the stability of friendships and cooperation in this region. I think without having to explain it, Southeast Asia has a different strategic quality relative to Northeast Asia or South Asia or Pacific Ocean countries. So that explains the very intense efforts by China to develop good relations with ASEAN, and that has paid off. I think there's no doubt that across the board in Southeast Asia, China is regarded as the most consequential country. Of course, there's the United States, there's Japan, there's Korea, Russia, and so on. But I think it's fair to say that for many of them, China ranks at the top one or top two most consequential countries to the countries in Southeast Asia. And the relationship between Southeast Asian countries, between ASEAN countries and China, also happens to be the fastest growing one, the one that is marked by very strong contrast, what happened where it was 30 years ago and where it is now. And that relationship has again been proved these recent days during the COVID crisis, because China has come up strong, engaging ASEAN early on, and also with Indonesia in particular, providing a vaccine, the cooperation between Sinovac and Biopharma, where they're supposed to provide something like 30 to 40 million vaccines early January, as President Jokowi has said. Right? So I think that is another aspect that is important about China's engagement in the region, and that is one issue that is being asked by our survey to the respondents, which is China's emergence as a solution provider, which is something new to the region. And I think the result is quite interesting, the result of what the respondents say about China being a solution provider. In recent times, we've heard strong words from Washington, D.C. towards China, said by the White House and by Secretary of State Pompeo. Hold on a second. Chloe, can you turn it down, please? Yeah. It needs to be understood that Southeast Asia has our own mind when it comes to viewing the world and when it comes to viewing China. We understand that there's increasing strategic offensive or insecurity coming from Washington when they look to China. But the Southeast Asian view towards China will always be a Southeast Asian view based on our own interests and our own outlook in looking at China. And I think it's safe to say that the Southeast Asian way of looking at China will always be different than the U.S. view of looking at China. And I think this is reflected in the survey that we've done in recent months, and that Sofwan will discuss. The important thing to understand about the survey is that there's always there are two levels of looking at China. There's always the elite view, meaning the smart diplomats, where I used to work, at the foreign ministry and so on. The political establishment view. But then there is another view, which is the public and grassroots view. And since this is such an important relationship and one for the long term, it is important to understand the views from both of these levels, the political elite, the political establishment, and the grassroots. And finally, it is important to understand that when it comes to these kind of relationships, relationship between Southeast Asia and a big country, right? The big country here being China. We need to be patient and to understand there's always some aspects of it that will be misunderstood, right? And this is quite common because, Indonesia's relations with Singapore, many aspects of it are always misunderstood by the part of the general public, and same with Indonesia-Australia relations and Indonesia's relations with Malaysia, for example. Some aspects of it will always be misunderstood, by some parts of the general public, and this is why this kind of survey is important to look deeper into that, and for the political establishment to understand how we can work on these perceptions or misperceptions, and try to be patient, but focus in socializing the different aspects of the relationship to support stronger and more durable relations between ASEAN and China in the future. So I'll stop there. Again, I want to thank Pak Sofwan and all the staffs who have been working hard to do this survey. I know it's not an easy one, but they've done a good job, a great job at it, and I look forward to hearing the results of the survey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rino, for such enlightening opening up on our discussion today. I would let's start the discussion, and I would like to invite Dr. Sofwan Albana to start the discussion. The floor is yours, Doctor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Calvin, and thank you very much, Dino, for your kind words and the highlights on why this survey is conducted. But before going further, I would like to also welcome all of our panelists today, our distinguished speakers today. First, Dr. Kin Pia, the Director General of the International Relations Institute of Cambodia. Welcome, Dr. Kin Pia.
Thank you. Yeah.
And then I would like also to welcome Dr. Jayan Menon, visiting senior fellow of the ICES, Institute for Southeast Asian Studies, Yusuf Ishak Institute, Singapore. Good afternoon, Dr. Jayan Menon. And then also Dr. Ha Antoine, the Executive Director of the Foundation for East Sea Studies, Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam. I think the name of the foundation itself is very interesting because this will go to our discussion also on the relationship between ASEAN and China. Before going to the discussion and hearing the insights from all of the speakers, I would like to give some highlights on our findings on the first phase of the research. So this ASEAN-China Survey 2020, assessing the present and envisioning the future of ASEAN-China relations, is conducted to capture and explore the perceptions and attitudes of ASEAN people, including the elite part of the society and the public part of the society, to capture these different perspectives. This research classify the respondents into 5 categories. The 4 first categories belongs to the elite, and the last one is the student. The 4 categories that is included in the elite category are government officials, academics and think tanks, business sector, and civil society. In the first phase, we collected responses from 550 respondents from all 10 ASEAN countries, with the quite representative distribution among between countries and also between categories. Several interesting findings that I would like to highlight here is that in general, the survey finds that most people in the region, we are looking across all categories, and if we look at the total respondents, it's more than half, and across the categories, similar pattern also visible, with different degrees, that in general the audience, the respondents, view that the relationship between ASEAN and China is something that is beneficial, mutually beneficial for both ASEAN and China. And it is also seen as contributing positively towards the peace, stability, and progress in the region. As Pak Dino has highlighted, I think this is illustrating that there is an increasing cooperation between both rising or emerging entities in the world, which is China and ASEAN. However, the survey also find that there are some still some caution, some skepticism, which remains especially in sensitive issues such as in the security issues. Thus, I think one of the question that I would like to pose to all speakers here is that if we look deeper, there is a pattern that positive assessments are overwhelmingly visible in the issue of economic cooperation and socio-cultural cooperation, including the issue of COVID management. However, if we look at the political security dimension of the relationship, there is significantly higher level of caution and worries among ASEAN respondents. By understanding this, what do you think? How should ASEAN-China cooperation proceed in the future? Should ASEAN-China cooperation focus more on issues where trust is more visible rather than on sensitive issues such as political economy cooperation? And the second question, I think, is also connected to this issue that Pak Dino already highlighted, that one of the most important feature of international relations in the region right now is the arrival of great power rivalry, especially between the US and China. And our survey also asked questions related to that. In general, as Dino has already mentioned, ASEAN has its own view in its relationship with China. And related to the rivalry, ASEAN tends to see that ASEAN must not side with only one side. Very tiny part of the audience mentioned that they should side with US or they should side with China. But the other segment of the respondents, other parts of the respondents, overwhelmingly see that ASEAN must not side with any of this great power. However, furthermore, they even view that ASEAN must proactively mediate the relationship between the two great powers, since uncontrolled great power rivalry would negatively affect the region and, of course, the development in ASEAN countries. However, when asked about how to do that, many of them are still having not a very clear idea. So I would like to ask this question. What role can ASEAN do to mitigate the great power rivalry? Most of the audience agree, most of the respondents agree that ASEAN must play a role to manage this, even to mediate between the two great powers, but how to do that? And how ASEAN can contribute to that. I think I would start with those two big questions, and I would like to invite the speakers to provide their insights on those questions, as well as other aspects of ASEAN-China relations that you think is important to be highlighted. I would like to first invite Dr. Kinvea, the Director General of International Relations Institute of Cambodia. Time is yours, sir.
Okay, thank you very much for having me for this panel discussion. I have reviewed the report and I agree with the report that capture many aspects of the relation between China and ASEAN. I can say that the ASEAN and China kept close coordination and cooperation on international and regional issues already, but we still have many challenges that we have. Some concrete idea that including some sensitive issue related to geopolitical competition between China and the US, South China's issue, and currently is the COVID-19 is a big problem. So I agree with the report that the world economy is now undergoing profound change, faces many challenges, especially under the impact of trade protectionism, anti-globalization, and BRI. China proposed global idea with the BRI, so I think we should focus on some main idea with regard to the relation. I agree that there are some issues that we should focus on the investment that made by China, including environment, human rights, rule of law, and sustainability, transparency, accountability, and especially for the benefit of the local people. This is that we can bring a better image of the relation. If we talk about the relation between the China and ASEAN, it is something confusing for the Asian people, because we have many layers of cooperation. For example, like bilateral relation between China and Asian member states. We have another platform like Lan Chang Mekong Cooperation. We have BRI project. So it seemed to be very confusing to highlight, to identify the whole picture of the ASEAN-China cooperation or relation. So this is very important that we have to differentiate the bilateral relation and multilateral relation. I think in our report we cannot differentiate the whole image of the relation between ASEAN and China, and China and Asian member states. For example, the respondent in Cambodia, I think that they mainly focus on what image that they can see in Cambodia with regard to the bilateral relation. We have many platforms here, so the respondent might be confusing with this report. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much. Very important and interesting comment. I think this report as the way to capture this, how to say, this often persistent, incomplete understanding of the public, or even among the elites on various aspects of ASEAN-China relations, and this sometimes they confuse one part with another part, and I think that is an interesting and an important note for this research. And of course, it is important to always bear in our mind about that. I would like to invite the next speaker, Dr. Jael Menon, visiting senior fellow of the ICs Institute. You can also add your own observation, not only commenting on the survey, but also on this issue of great power rivalry, as well as on how should ASEAN-China cooperation proceed in the future by considering some aspects discussed in the survey result. Thank you. Time is yours.
Right. Thank you very much, Shohan, and let me start by thanking the organizers for having me here today. It's a great pleasure for me to be part of this, and good afternoon, selamat siang to all your audience. I think the interesting points that you raised in summarizing your survey results that you'd like me to comment on relate to one, whether we can actually divorce the economics from the geopolitics, firstly. And secondly, how can ASEAN as an institution play a role, or what kind of role, in trying to improve China-ASEAN relations? So starting with the first point, I think as your survey clearly demonstrates, China is a critical partner for ASEAN in the economic sphere. And here there is no confusion about the benefits or the mutual benefits of this relationship on the economic front. And as we go forward, that economic relationship is growing stronger, and even through crises like the one we're going through now with COVID, we see that the economic relationship is very resilient. And I think this will continue and grow over time. The issue, as your survey highlights, is everything else, right? The geopolitics, the security, and all the other sensitive issues. And this is where the problem lies, according to your survey. Now, I don't think we can separate the two. You cannot grow your economic relationship if the geopolitical issues become overbearing. There's no better example of that than ASEAN itself, right? ASEAN, as you know, was born as a political security pact during the Vietnam War, and was designed to preserve the peace as much as possible in the region. And that's how it was born. That's how it's continued to thrive. And the economic agenda is a latecomer for ASEAN. But it's only been possible because of the achievements in preserving the peace, the role it's played. It's played a positive role. It's not the only factor, but it's played an important contributing role in preserving the peace. So we must ensure that the geopolitics does not get out of hand and threaten the strong, mutually beneficial economic relationship between ASEAN and China. So that brings me to the second question that you posed, which is how can ASEAN play a role, or what role can ASEAN play in preserving that relationship? Here, I have to be very frank and be open and say, I think the role that ASEAN can play is very limited. ASEAN is not designed for this type of process in terms of engagement in sensitive issues. I said earlier that ASEAN has been very successful in helping preserve the peace, but it has done that through a policy of non-interference. So it has tied its own hands by design in terms of how much it can do, right? What it can do is try not to take sides in, for instance, the US-China dispute, and play the role of, an intermediary that doesn't fuel the flames, right? It cannot put out the flames through proactive actions because it's not set up for that purpose, but it can do a lot, but by not fueling the flames, right? And so that's what it can do. Also, I think China will realize the significance of ASEAN as a partner in the economic sphere and have a much more generous position in terms of dealing with this region, given the long-term benefits. So China must engage with ASEAN in a way that ensures that it, as the giant, as the big brother in a sense, has more to gain by being magnanimous, by being charitable almost in terms of many critical issues. And so that's where the benefits will lie if China is a bit more conducive to giving in on some sensitive issues. And I hope that's what will happen. And that's what should happen. ASEAN countries have different interests when it comes to engaging with China. Cambodia's relationship is very different from Vietnam's relationship. Countries that have disputes over the territorial waters have a very different type of objective in its engagement. So within ASEAN, it's difficult to take a common position because of different interests. And so I think, unfortunately, the ball will have to be in China's court, and China must engage with ASEAN in a way that's very different from how it deals with its internal issues, and hopefully will be, as I said, bigger because of its bigger role, and take a long-term view and concede in some areas in the short run to strengthen the long-run relationship. So let me stop there with those points. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Jan Menon. I think it is interesting to highlight that ASEAN is not designed to
Yes, I think it also very good points from Dr. Jan Menon that said ASEAN is not designed for this kind of the situation sometimes, but ASEAN also still need to continue proactively contribute to the stability itself. So I think you pose a very good points of it. And let me continue to Dr. Antoine. What's your perspective on the question about the economic and how we should drive our relationship ahead with China? And about the question of geopolitics, US-China, what do you see about this? Please, Dr. Antoine.
Thank you very much. So I assume that you all can listen to me, right?
Yes, very clear.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, I would like to comment on the foreign policy community of Indonesia for organizing this very interesting event, especially in the time of COVID-19 pandemic. And thank you for inviting me to this conversation. I think that the survey of FPCI and is another example of Indonesia's proactiveness in regional affairs. Now, if we look back at the history of how Indonesia contribute to international relations and regional affairs in the past, we understand the important roles of Indonesia in the region. I think that in the past years, not only since Sino-US competition becomes more tense, but even more than further than that, we see some institutions in the region conducting surveys on ASEAN countries, perceptions on China and on the US, and on how we can respond to China-US relations. We have two specific questions here, but before going into specific questions, I think that I would like to raise 3 points that could set the kind of principles or the umbrella for ASEAN-China relations. Point number 1, I think China-Southeast Asia relations, and particularly China-ASEAN relations, are very important, both for China and ASEAN in many levels of aspects of analysis. Both if we look at the geostrategic and economic aspects, we see China and Southeast Asia are closely linked and to some extent interdependent. Now China and ASEAN are respectively, say, the largest trading partners of each other. That is very impressive. Then I think this trend will continue to be in the coming years. Principle number 2, I think my view is that in order for ASEAN and China to build substantial and comprehensive relations, I think ASEAN must be united. This argument seems to be contradictory with some existing views that saying that China does not want to see a strong and united ASEAN. But I believe that without a strong voice and united position, it is very hard for ASEAN to have substantial agreements and cooperation with China. So we can see a lot of examples in the past, and we can elaborate later if we have more time. Principle number 3 is that the ground for ASEAN-China relations should be international law. We see some different proposed frameworks for cooperation in the region and in the international relations as well. China also proposed some new concepts, such as the community of shared futures and so on. But I think even the relationship between brothers and sisters in a family will need a rule that, and the local rules must based on the international rules. So in order for ASEAN-China cooperation to be nurtured, I think we need to foster a kind of rules-based order in the region. And generally speaking, we uphold the principles in the UN Charter, and in specific areas, we will see different other rules. For example, in the maritime domain, we see the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. That is a kind of the general guidance, the principles that we need to uphold. So if we keep the 3 principles in mind in terms of ASEAN-China relations, I agree with many points the 2 previous commentators have made. So for question number 1, for example, if we look at China-ASEAN relations and China-Southeast Asia relations, we see two different realities. On the one hand, the economic and social cooperation seems to have more opportunities, while the security and political cooperation seems quite limited, as you can see in the survey. But whether we should focus more on less sensitive issue and leave aside the more difficult issues for the future, I think this is quite a kind of tricky question. Of course, focusing more on the less sensitive issues and economic cooperation would have say better future, better outcomes than on more challenging issues, more sensitive issues. But if we just say that, or we just leave the sensitive issues for the next generation, or when the mutual trust and confidence is built, I think we have seen it for decades, that we have discussed about, say, setting aside the sensitive issue, focusing more on the low-hanging fruits to be achieved. But I think at this moment, we need to be very balanced. We need to go both on the less sensitive issue, and at the same time, sit down and talk about the more sensitive and more difficult issues, although they may be hard to get to agreement. But at least we can agree upon the disagree. We can understand the position of each other, and that is, I think, the starting point for ASEAN and China to further our cooperation. With question number 2, what role ASEAN can do, say, in this regional context, as in the principle? I think one reason, one idea that I proposed is that ASEAN need to be more united, to get the stronger position, and to have, say, the more, say, common interest. Without the common interest, without the common, say, political will of all ASEAN countries, the cooperation between ASEAN itself is already hard, let alone, say, ASEAN-China cooperation. So point number 1, ASEAN should try to foster our unity and try to get some common understanding and common positions in the very important issue, so that this can serve as the foundation for ASEAN-China relations and also ASEAN-US relations as well. I also agree that ASEAN should not take side in this very strategic moment, whether taking side with the US or China, because ASEAN, I agree, should not fuel the flame, and we can serve as as one actor promoting the rules in the region. As we can see in the ASEAN Outlook in the Indo-Pacific, we set out specific rules for cooperation in the region, not within the ASEAN countries, but also with other countries. So I think I will stop for now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. I think it is a very interesting that maybe
Dr. Sofwan, I think we cannot hear you clearly.
Proactive role, however, that will need ASEAN unity and developing ASEAN unity. Before going to the question and answer, hello, can I? I'm turning off the video.
Yeah, I think now it's much
Hello?
better. Yeah, we have some problem to hear your voice. I think you can repeat your questions, Dr. Sofwan.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point made by Dr. Antoine on that ASEAN could play a role beyond not flaming the tension, but that will need ASEAN unity. So I think I would like, before to go to our question and answer session, I would like to ask another question to all the panelists here. Is it how to build ASEAN unity, and how can ASEAN maintain its centrality in the region, and is centrality important in the relationship between China and ASEAN? How important is that? Can ASEAN proceed in its relationship with China by compromising some part of its centrality, or is it something that must be maintained at all costs, and how to maintain that? I would like to return to the first speaker, Dr. Kim Pia.
Yeah, thank you. I think that the rule-based organization that we have established in ASEAN is very important, that all nations in ASEAN, we have to uphold multilateralism, as the world we are facing is that increasing uncertainty with rising protectionism. So, and unilateralism, regional hotspot issue have graphed up, bringing and accelerated challenges to our region. So I think that all countries that we have to respect each other, and with the rule-based system that we have to strictly follow. And ASEAN unity is very important, but now we can see some challenge in ASEAN unity with regard to the some disagreement among some sensitive issue within our region. For example, with regard to the South China issue, and also the territorial border issue between among ASEAN themselves. So I think it is important that all nations in ASEAN have to respect each other, especially with regard to the sovereignty, the independence, and we have to follow to abide by the ASEAN Charter. So this is very important that we have to have some agreement with some sensitive issue. And with regard our relation with China, I think it is still important that we have to coordinate the strategic plan in our relation with China, and we have to cultivate the new growth of for our cooperation. We have to sustain the people-to-people communication, especially a strong China is a relationship boiled down to the people tie ASEAN-China young leadership scholarship was established. It is very important for the relation between the China and ASEAN. And finally, is that the safeguard regional peace and stability, which is a common aspiration to share responsibility of China and ASEAN country. Both are committed to negotiate it, especially for the South China issue that become a challenging issue for our centrality, our unity, and also a challenge for the relation between ASEAN and China as well. So the formulation of the regional maritime rule is also very important, and all countries in ASEAN and China should accelerate the COC for the South China Sea issue. I think this is a very important point, and both sides, I think we have to have some mechanism for defense. As in our report highlighted that we still have some point that still a challenge for the relation with regard to the defense, and as well we explain exchange coordination in military security and law enforcement to tackle regional and security challenges. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kimpia. I think
thank you very much, Dr. Kimpia. I would like to proceed to Dr. Jaimenon on the same question. Is ASEAN unity possible, desirable by all parties in the region, and how to build that?
Right, thank you. I think the first thing to remind ourselves about is that, ASEAN is the most resilient grouping amongst developing countries in the world, right? The international landscape of regional bodies is littered with groupings that are dormant or have basically, gone out of existence. But ASEAN has survived more than 50 years, and in fact, it's thrived. So history is on our side, right? We've been able to overcome all kinds of challenges, and we've come so far together. And I think ASEAN's unity has a very strong footing, right? And very strong basis to continue. There'll be new challenges all the time. The latest is, keeping the grouping united in the face of, failing world trade or global trade order, which is under threat for various reasons. That's a separate webinar. I think we can discuss those issues. But rules-based order is been weakened, and as much as possible, I think regional institutions to try and fill that gap as much as possible. I think the idea that
and how much and how possible is that for ASEAN
to fill that gap?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it cannot fill the gap completely, but it can help countries to try and put it this way, right? ASEAN as a group, negotiating with China is a better outcome than individual members trying to resolve their individual disputes with China when it comes to these sensitive issues. Let me put it that way. And as much as possible, we should try and get the grouping, right, to find a common position. And countries that don't have much of a stake, so-called, secondary countries with that much of a issue with China on the South China Sea or other territorial issues, should, put their hand up for ASEAN first, right? And so come up with a common position. But the other point that I want to make is that, ASEAN is not the only game in town. There's other things that ASEAN belongs to. We have RCEP hopefully being concluded this year, which brings in, China in a more formal framework, although most of it is designed around the economic agenda. But of course, we have the East Asian Summit, right? Unfortunately, once again, given external factors, the lack of interest from the US and so on in the multilateral process, this has been weakened, but it's still alive. It still exists. So ASEAN needs to have a common position in dealing with these issues in broader regional and global frameworks, right? And while this unity might be tested by things like the South China Sea issue, it's more important than ever for ASEAN to try and find common ground and stick together and have a common position to improve the negotiating position. Not all issues are win-win outcomes. That win-win outcomes are not the issue. It's the one where zero-sum outcomes are present, and there are a lot of those. And China must follow international law when it comes to the South China Sea, right? And there's no two ways around it. And as much as possible, ASEAN should stick together in ensuring that that rules-based outcome is more likely than not. So let me stop there.
Thank you very much. Last but not least, Dr. Antoine, on ASEAN centrality, how to maintain ASEAN centrality and ASEAN unity.
Okay, so I think that the ASEAN unity and ASEAN centrality are the two aspects, and they are mutually reinforcing. With ASEAN centrality, we can have ASEAN unity, and vice versa. With ASEAN's unity, we can build the ASEAN centrality. Now, I think for ASEAN to be united and to have a kind of stronger ASEAN, I think like the principles that I set out in the beginning, every relations need to have the rules. So within ASEAN, we need to have our own rules to foster ASEAN cooperation. And the rules can be set in many different ways, the international law, but also the regional, say, political documents, and for example, the TAC. The second point is that I think economic cooperation is a very important aspect for ASEAN to strengthen its cooperation. We see ASEAN's intra-ASEAN trade is around less than one fourth of total ASEAN trade, and this statistic is relatively low comparing with other regional institutions. So focusing on economic cooperation within ASEAN, I think, is one way to foster stronger ASEAN cooperation and ASEAN unity. Number three, ASEAN need to engage more with regional affairs. I think we need to discuss more about this, because sometimes regional countries does not want ASEAN to be involved in their own situation. But we also look back at in the history of ASEAN, we don't see any specific issue that is the real issue for all 10 ASEAN countries. Even the South China Sea, which is very hotspot in the region. If we say the South China Sea is mainly the business of, say, littoral states and the claimant states, then other countries may be less interested in involving in the region. But if we think about that way, then it is very hard for ASEAN to have the same voice. Now, move to the second point, how to deal with China. I think one issue is that for ASEAN-China relations is that we tend to see the interest of China and ASEAN to some extent different from one another. But if we are able to persuade China that a strong and united ASEAN is of China's interest, then I think that could be very good for ASEAN-China relations. And also a kind of rules-based order that ASEAN is promoting in the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific. These kind of things are not for the interest of only Southeast Asian countries, but also for China as well. So we can continuously persuade China that the values that ASEAN is promoting is well in line with the China's interest. Then I think we would have stronger grounds for ASEAN-China cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very important point, that ASEAN centrality and unity should be seen as also in the interest of China. And by understanding this, by mutually understanding this, I think the relationship could be strengthened for the benefits of both China and ASEAN. And I think today we see that I think all of the speakers agree that both China and ASEAN are rising as important global players, and with that, the relationship between them is also becoming very important. Of course, as in a relationship between brothers and sisters, problems sometimes occur. And to deal with that, it is important to try to understand each other, to hear and to listen, and to understand that there are possibilities of bridging the interest and finding common interest, even in sensitive issues. With that, I would like to close the panel session and move to the question and answer session. And since this is a very interesting topic, we already have 6 questions, but I would like to start with 3 questions first. And I would like to ask this question to all the panelists. First is from Ramet Kim, a professor at the SRU, Cambodia. The question is, how effective and when the bilateral solution, as seen in the territorial dispute that took over the past decade among those territorial claimants? How effective is the bilateral solution? And the second is by Romi from Serang Raya University. What's the most efficient way to set the same vision on ASEAN countries without each country's own interest, in order to make sustainable, beneficent cooperation between China and ASEAN? So what's the most efficient way to set ASEAN common vision? A third from Sabtopo, the University Pembangunan Nasional, Veteran, Yogyakarta, to whom ASEAN member countries' loyalties goes bigger, to each of its bilateral partner outside ASEAN or to ASEAN? Is ASEAN loyal to external partner or are loyal to ASEAN? Are ASEAN member countries loyal to ASEAN or loyal to their non-ASEAN external partners? I think that are the three questions. To shake up things a bit, I would like to refer to the direction. I will start with Dr. Antoine to answer that three question, please.
Okay, so thank you very much for the three difficult questions, I think. So, I think for number one, how effective is bilateral solution for kind of territorial disputes, right?
Yeah,
I put it this way. In Southeast Asia and in the relationship with between China and Southeast Asian countries, we see the bilateral territorial dispute, and we also see the multilateral dispute. For example, in the South China Sea, we see both bilateral and multilateral. So wherever the territorial dispute is bilateral by nature, then we will go bilateral. But if the dispute is multilateral by nature, then we have to go in multilateral mechanisms. But with the bilateral dispute, of course, the two claimants are the most important, say, parties negotiating to settle disputes. But if we look at the international laws, we see different measures to settle disputes. And if they refer to a kind of institutions to mediate that, if the two parties agree, then ASEAN could help. That is a way, but of course the direct parties should be the one who decide that. Question number two, the efficient way to set common interest for ASEAN countries in ASEAN-China relations.
Yeah.
So yes. I think in both question 2 and question 3, I put it this way. Each country has its own national interest. China has its own national interest. Vietnam, Cambodia, Indonesia, Singapore, we do have our own national interest. But at the same time, we share the strategic interest of ASEAN member as an institution. So balancing between the national interest and the regional interest and the grouping interest is very important. Even for question, I go with question 3 first. Whether ASEAN countries is loyal to external countries or ASEAN countries, of course, we are loyal to only one thing, our own national interest. But in order to materialize our national interest, we foster a relationship with China, with the US, with ASEAN countries, with European countries, and with many other countries in the region. And they don't need to be contradictory with one another. Countries can foster relations with many other countries, not only one group. But personally, I think for Vietnam, we see ASEAN as a very important direction for Vietnam's foreign policy. We often put ASEAN, say, on top of our priorities in our foreign policy. So this is what we can observe in Vietnamese foreign policy. To set the common interest for ASEAN countries to foster ASEAN-China relations, I think, as I said in the beginning, we have, say, the national interest and the regional interest. So try to balance the long-term strategic interest of the whole region, of the whole Southeast Asia, and the shorter term of national interest, the economic benefits of a country. I think each country has its own way of calculation to balance, but we need to see the strategic interest of having a strong ASEAN, and as we see, and Dr. Jayan said, the history is on our side. We see over 50 years, ASEAN have been maintaining, existing and promoting regional peace and and prosperity. So if we look at the longer history, we see that ASEAN has a very important role, and we need to invest. And to some extent, we need to balance between our national interest and the regional interest to go both with ASEAN and with our own national interest. We have a kind of saying that if we go alone, we can go a bit fast, but if we want to go far, we need to go with friends. That's why we need ASEAN. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think important highlight on that ASEAN countries are acting based on their own national interests, and the problem is how to align ASEAN collective interest as well as the interest of external partners with this in order to create and preserve stability and peace in the region. I would like to proceed to Dr. Jayan Menon. The same question. Yeah.
Okay, so I think the previous speaker has already made some very useful and interesting responses. I only have a little bit to add. I guess, the point I was trying to make about ASEAN's resilience and how it survived this incredibly long period and all these challenges is a blessing, and also also part of the problem, right? The reason why it's been able to survive so long is because it has a very loose structure, right? There is very little appetite in ASEAN to surrender sovereignty to supranational decision-making bodies, right? We've seen how even the European Union, the classic model, is under threat by going too far in terms of trying to, have a centralized, more centralized system with greater surrender of sovereignty. ASEAN is not that way, and that's why it survived, right? It's gone through, it has a system where it's largely consensus-based, so that means you can only go as far or as quickly as your weakest member, right? So this is a constraint, right? And so this affects all of its decision making, right? But it also ensures its survival, right? And that's how it's come so long, and still remains around today. But in terms of how it can try and increase its unity, I think, again, we have to find areas where there's common interests. Increasing interdependence, I think, is one way of ensuring that countries see that commonality of interest, right? But at the end of the day, some issues are just more national than regional, right? And it is those issues that matter. And how will individual countries respond? Well, they'll respond in a way that protects their national interests, as the previous speaker mentioned, right? We saw this play out when Cambodia chaired ASEAN. The concern raised by many people is that, Cambodia decided not to issue, stop the communique being issued because they preferred to side with China rather than ASEAN. That was the general perception. I don't want to say whether this is right or wrong. It's not my role, but that was the concern, and that threatened to fracture ASEAN. It's those sorts of situations that we need to be concerned about, right? It's all nice to say we have to find areas where national and regional coincide, but there will be cases where they don't, and then we have to guard against those sorts of outcomes that can threaten a loosely bound institution like ASEAN. So going forward, when that happens again, ASEAN survived that, by the way, right? So that's a good thing. It survived that challenge when Cambodia chaired, and it's still around today, which is, the old saying, what doesn't destroy me makes me stronger. And so going forward, hopefully this will happen again when countries do decide to, to favor their national interests in a way that fractures the cohesion within the organization, ASEAN has shown that that will not break ASEAN. And that's a good thing, right? And there'll be more of these things going forward, and the South China Sea potentially will create those sorts of situations if China doesn't compromise a little bit and decide to, concede, as the bigger partner and follow, international rulings, right? And as must all ASEAN countries also follow international rulings. So finally, let me just say, when you have unequal power, it's always in the interest of the stronger partner to negotiate bilaterally. We have to recognize that reality. So it's in ASEAN's hands to try and provide a forum that respects the very important concerns of some members in a way that makes them feel like this is a grouping worth belonging to, right? So the South China Sea issue is a very important issue for some members, but not all, right? But for them to feel like ASEAN is worth being a member of, ASEAN must represent those very important issues for those countries that belong to ASEAN. Let me stop there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jayamanon. I would like to proceed to Dr. Kinpia.
Yeah. Thank you. I agree with the two panelists that raised. But one thing that we have to know that when ASEAN was first established in 1967, it was something to prevent from the spread of communism. I mean that all the five ASEAN were united to prevent the spread of the communism. And now, in the spirit of the community spirit, we are united. We have to balance, as Dr. John said, balance between the national interest and the regional interest that we have to go so far. So we have to uphold the multilateralism for our cooperation, for our region. We cannot take sides. We cannot take sides with China or with the US or EU. We have to have a rule-based order. And coming to the South China Sea issue, I have something to add is that the Cambodia position toward the South China Sea issue and currently it's become very sensitive. We have to know that in our constitution, Cambodia foreign policy is grounded in principle of neutrality. The country has done its best to remain neutral as much as it can through the modern history. Maybe you remember that in 2012, when Cambodia was in chair, country received a lot of criticism. Cambodia was tough as the Chinese grand state was perceived as allies closely with China at the expense of the ASEAN unity and its relation with ASEAN country. These propositions, I think, seem logical, but they seem to overlook Cambodia neutral stance. Cambodia is a non-climate state, as you see in South China Sea. We support bilateral mechanisms that aim to resolve the differences between ex-Asian member states, climate state, and China. If Cambodia took part in the decision to condemn China for it growing assertiveness in South China Sea, it would remain Cambodia was biased and did not uphold the principle of neutrality and instinct in its foreign policy. Moreover, if Cambodia joined climate states to criticize China officially, it would mean that Cambodia brought ASEAN into direct conflict with China. So this scenario would not bring about any benefit to ASEAN-China relation as well as a bilateral relation between China and ex-ASEAN state. So instead, we would spare disaster for bilateral and multilateral tie between the two parties. I think every nation has its own national interest, but we also balance it with the regional interest. So Cambodia value the good relation and cooperation between China and ASEAN. So we urge and we encourage all common state and China go to the solution with peaceful means and try to accelerate this COC as a rule based for the territorial dispute in the South China Sea issue. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very insightful responses. And I think several of the answers from the speakers already also answered the question from several other questions by the audience, by Faris from Pajajaran University, Fakhri from Pasundan University, as well as Carolina. So I would like to proceed to the next question. This is a little bit refreshing, a little bit specific. How should ASEAN countries and China develop cooperation in the digital economy through smart city construction? As we know, a lot of discussion are now going on the smart cities, and China is very active in this issue too. And ASEAN, I think, is also having initiatives on that smart city construction. How can ASEAN and China develop cooperation in this specific sector? How can ASEAN China formulate policies and regulations that can benefit both China and ASEAN member countries? I would like to start with the economist here, Dr. Jayan Menon, on smart city.
Okay, thank you, Sean. Yeah, so I think we're often told that the silver lining of this horrible COVID pandemic is that it will hasten our speed towards the digital economy, right? And that's one of the positive things to come out of this horrible episode. I think what we need to bear in mind is that while that might be true, one clear consequence of this whole fourth industrial revolution is the potential to raise inequality, right? Both within countries and between countries, right? Now, the concern, of course, in ASEAN is that Singapore will benefit the most. In fact, interestingly, Singapore was the one that proposed the smart city idea when it was chairing ASEAN. And we need to be aware that not everyone will benefit equally, but there are mutual benefits to be had, right? By embracing rather than retreating from the digital economy. One area I think ASEAN can play a role in, because again, most of the initiative will be national, right? In preparing for the fourth industrial revolution and in also implementing policies, etc. It'll be almost all national, but there's some role for regional, right? And one area would be to deal with labor mobility, right? So the more advanced countries have their skills to offer the less advanced countries in the region. This includes, China has a lot of skills, and highly skilled. Most of the robots in the world live in China, Japan, and Korea, right? Robotics, China is clearly a leader. So we need to see how ASEAN can help with facilitating greater skilled labor mobility beyond the MRAs, right? The MRAs is what ASEAN is doing now, but they're already out of date, right? The professions that they're dealing with have nothing to do with the fourth industrial revolution, right? We have to go beyond just architects and nurses. We need to look at, this new economy that we are dealing with, right? And also, I guess, bilaterally, skill exchanges with China can help in terms of promoting, the move towards smarter cities and generally towards the digital economy. Yes, that's right. So that's where I think ASEAN can play a role. But finally, of course, a lot of the labor movements within ASEAN is in the low-skilled area, right? And a lot of that is informal. We need to try and formalize that, because one of the things we know that will happen is there will be a lot of job displacement as a result of this digital economy. A lot of low-end work, low-skill work might be lost to increasing automation. But one way to offset some of the costs is to free up labor mobility so that, aging societies versus young societies, people can move around a bit more easily to fill in those demographic trends that diverge across countries. So both at the skill level and at the low skill level, I think there's a role for ASEAN and ASEAN-China cooperation to be mutually beneficial.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much. Looking at that way, a lot of opportunities for cooperation despite this pandemic, and even the pandemic creates some incentives to embrace the digital economy, but we must be aware of the impact on inequality within countries and between countries. But ASEAN as well as China is in a quite well positioned to do cooperation in this sector. Dr. Kinvia, do you have any thoughts on this cooperation on the digital sector between China and ASEAN member countries? I think you're still muted. You can click the microphone. Yes.
Okay, I think the China is a very important partner for ASEAN in terms of the digital economy or something called smart city, because it's a very, I can say it's a new concept for Cambodia as well. If we talk about the technology or even the internet access, I think we still have some gap. For example, like in our conversation, we still have some problems. So what do you
really sorry
about the digital economy? So I think it is very important that the two sides, China and ASEAN, have to explore the cooperation on standard by promoting the cooperation in communication, mutual recognition, development of use suitable international standard related policy and conformity assessments regarding smart city technology industry. We found that in China, everything is so smart already, but in Asia, we have very different gap within the technology. And I think it is important that China and ASEAN have to promote capacity building and knowledge sharing by encouraging university, enterprises, research institutions to conduct training program, to join nurture talent in field of smart city development and encourage sharing among related government department, research institution, enterprises, and other relevant stakeholders to promote the sharing of knowledge, technology, and innovative solution. Yeah, that's my point.
Thank you very much. Sorry for the connection, especially mine. I think I need to run faster into the digital world. I'll go to Dr. Antoine. Your comments on the cooperation in the smart cities, as well as the larger idea of digital economy or even digital society.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I'm not an expert in this area, so very short contribution adding to the points that have been raised by two other speakers. I think I fully agree that say we all see the importance of developing, say, the technological cooperation between China and ASEAN, and we have a lot of advantages in fostering this kind of cooperation. But one challenge that we may also think of is the nature of the digital society. We may, I don't know, I'm not expert in this area, so I don't know whether between ASEAN countries we have, say, the general agreement on the concept of what it means by smart city, and between ASEAN countries and China, whether we are agreed upon that kind of concept. For example, whether we are happy with a city in which all people are, say, tracked for all of their activities and so on and so forth. Maybe some people feel happy with that, some may not feel happy with that. So this is the very big challenge that we need to agree upon, the general concept. And point number 2 is the trust, because say the digital world is about the big data, and how can we manage the big data? Who manage the big data? And whether we have the faith on those who control the big data of the society. This is very important. So I think it is important to foster cooperation, but on the other hand, we have to tackle the very big challenges of understanding what it means by smart city, and how we overcome the problem of, say, managing the big data in the way that all people are happy with. Thank you.
Interesting. So it's not only a technical question, it's not only a matter of capacity, it is also a philosophical as well as political questions that I think we all must ask ourselves. And with that, I think we have come into the end of our discussion today. Very interesting and very fruitful, and I'm very thankful to all of the speakers, to Dr. Kinpia, Dr. Jayamenon, as well as Dr. Antoine. Very your insightful perspectives enrich our discussion today, and hopefully everyone is enjoying it, and not only enjoying it, but also taking that into our minds when we are talking about ASEAN-China cooperation. I think the highlight today here is that the cooperation between ASEAN-China is getting more and more important, but as any relationship, as any familial relationship, like siblings and sisters, brothers, of course there are issues to be managed, and this must be managed carefully by talking more empathetically to each other, as well as maybe trying to understand more what the people really want. I think that this survey attempts to capture some part of that, and hopefully this survey can also contribute to the discussion to shape a better future for all of us here in the region, in both in ASEAN as well as in China and other countries that are very attached to this region. Thank you very much for all of your contribution, as well as thank you very much for all of our listeners. I would like to return the opportunity to Calvin.
Thank you, Dr. Jayamenon, Dr. Kimpia, Dr. Antua, coming from Singapore, Cambodia, and also Vietnam, and also to all viewers across the region and also Indonesia. I think we have covered a lot of aspect about the relationship, and we all agree that ASEAN and China is a very important relationship, and next year is the 30 years of the relation between ASEAN and China. And ladies and gentlemen, the survey conducted by Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia is not concluded yet. It's still the preliminary result that we are coming to discuss today, and we're still continue welcoming you to participate to the survey. You can easily go to our official website www.fpcindonesia.org. You can go there and you can look and directly fill to the form that featured in our website. And don't forget also to follow our social media handles, Twitter, Facebook, and also Instagram, easy by @FPC Indo. So we are going to come up with a lot of events and also upcoming agendas. Again, the relationship between ASEAN and China is important and become a global players indeed to the post-COVID-19 situation. I thank you again to all the respected speakers and also Dr. Sofwan Albana as the moderator, who is also the senior advisor of ASEAN-China Survey 2020. Again, we welcome you to participate to the survey. It's still open. Let's give a more candid and also more productive report later on. And we'll, of course, we're gonna publish it soon when it's complete. Thank you for all the speakers. I hope you have a great day and also a good weekend. And thank you and see you next time.
See you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's off the record now.
Yeah, we're off the record. Thank you, Doctor. And